This is not great.
I think that Mike has to do that. No. Yeah.
Screen 2 in here somewhere.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I want to talk to you guys about hybrid desktop apps with Awesomium. This is not too long of a presentation, as it's just kind of just introducing new technology. I will go through a little bit of indentation at the end. All right, so starting. Like what does that even mean? You know, what does hybrid desktop applications mean? It means it's kind of the same thing that, well, this is what they describe themselves as, HTML UI engine for native desktop applications. And going more into that and building on that first point is that you can write native applications that run on a desktop in HTML, CSS, as using that as your front end, and then using this Awesomium to sort of do all the interactions you need to do with the actual system that you're running on. This is very similar to like how we do hybrid mobile apps, right? We write all our front ends, and the little bits that we have to touch the actual device, we delegate out to plugins, which run native code, and then we use web services and stuff like that. And this is kind of how this diagram kind of explains how it works. So here we've got your computer, right, which is passing inputs and into your program. So keyboard inputs, mouse inputs, whatever. Your program is then probably spitting out an image for what is the actual user interface and representation. What Awesomium is, which is this right here, is a child process. So when you're using Awesomium and you say init, it actually forks and starts another process. That process is a browser, right? It's a browser that it's not like a headless browser like Phantom, which Node is built on top of. It's a browser that thinks it's a browser and it's projecting to the screen, but it's actually not sending anything to the machine. It's actually sending all that information back to your program. So what it means so you'll say, okay, render this HTML page, right? So it's like, oh, I'm a browser, I'm rendering, I'm doing stuff, and then it'll make an image of that, and then it thinks it's drawing that to the screen, but actually what's happening, it's Awesomium is streaming that byte of data back to you. So you can do whatever you want with the image. You could display it, you could save it to disk, you do whatever. And then when it comes to things like inputs, you pass those inputs into Awesomium. You say, hey, there's a mouse event here. There's a keyboard event, and that browser is always thinking that it's actually just a regular browser. It's based on the Awesomium project, I believe it is, which is kind of like a Chrome fork. So it's pretty up to date in terms of like what things it supports. It's full HTML5 and all that kind of stuff. Does that make sense to you guys? So I wanted to show you guys quickly how to actually integrate it. This is going to go a little bit quicker than I imagined. But so what you do is you download it at their website, awesomium.com. By the way, I hate this name. I think it's stupid, but whatever. I use it. Right? They come with it's an installer. It supports all three, major operating systems. And the only downside right now to the installation process is that it's only 32-bit, which most of the time is not a big deal. But as you'll see in the application I wrote, I designed it from the onset to be 64-bit. I installed 64-bit libraries. I did all this stuff at 64-bit. And then I added Awesomium after the fact and had to go back and change everything back to 32-bit to get it to run. It was a bit of a pain. They're promising the 64-bit's going to come soon, but I don't know when that's going to be. Yeah. So
it's not 64-bit.
Yeah, I mean, you'll just have to limit yourself to 4 gigs of memory.
For a lot of people, that would be a showstopper.
Yeah, it's a bit of a pain. It was a bit of a pain to integrate, but whatever.
There's a ton of 32-bit stuff, though. If you're doing anything on Windows, most of the libraries are only 32-bit.
The big problem I ran into is that if you're on Linux or you're on OS X and you're using probably Brew or apt-get to get your packages, and you're getting third-party libraries, by default, those things will install the 64-bit versions of things onto your machine. Mm-hmm. Right, and that stuff works great if you're just kind of doing it the way they want you to do it. But anytime you're like, oh, I need to actually remove this library and install a new one, things get kind of hairy. So if you know you're going to want to integrate Awesomium into any one of these supported platforms, just think about that ahead of time. So let's go down to the supported platform. So it's primarily a C++ library, but they've built wrappers for .NET and Java. So you can pretty much run this, this is the major backend languages. The app that I'm going to show you guys is all written in C++, but yeah, I haven't played with the .NET implementation, but they have heavy support for that. The Java one is made by not them. It's made by just a person who did an open source project, because you can do JNI with Java, which is like you can wrap C++ stuff. So somebody just kind of just wrappers in Java for it. All right. Everything's cool. Everything's makes sense. It's okay. It's pretty straightforward. All right. I just wanted to show you guys a quick app that I'm going to write in Awesomium. All right. And what this is going to do is just going to list. It's an HTML app that lists the current directories and files on a file system based on a path. So this is a pretty easy page, and I'll show you guys how this looks rendered. So this is it rendered, right? Let me see if I can zoom in here a little bit, make it a little bit bigger. Right?
What's browser.js?
I'll show you what that is in a sec. Yeah, it's just the JavaScript files that kind of power this stuff. Browser is just a file thing that I came up with. But anyways, it's getting kind of slow here. So you click on here, it'll just append. This is the mock version of it, right? And I'll show you guys what that means. This is what it does. How it works is that, yes, there's two JS files that power this, right? The browser JS is the thing that has this path, and it shows what show directory is. Just goes in and rebuilds that list using a call from this object called the lister. The lister takes the path and just goes in and lists all the files in that path, and it uses JSON to communicate back to here. Now you'll see that there's a mock lister in my JS over here, and all this does is it created that little page we saw there. It's just a little JavaScript function that just spits out a string of JSON. And I do this because I'm still in Chrome at this point, right? I'm still just testing I'm not in Awesomium world. I'm just making an HTML JavaScript thing and then just playing around, make sure maybe I have my styles are correct or whatever it is. I'm developing here. Now it's when it comes time to actually integrating, I will remove this lister mock here. I'll comment it out and let Awesomium do the actual native file, native interactions for me. Good so far? So tell me if you got any questions, or I'm just, stuff is like I've been going over it a lot the last few days, so I might skip things that I think are kind of obvious. So now we're gonna switch over to Xcode, and we're gonna look at some C++, which I know is gonna be amazing. You guys are gonna love to look at some C++.
Absolutely.
You guys can see this? You can see this back there, Martin? No?
It's C++.
I can
It's as much as
see
he
it,
wants
but I
to
can't
see.
read it.
You want me to make it?
Pick up a little bit.
Make it a little bit bigger?
Yeah.
So now I gotta go there.
Yeah, how do you do that in Xcode again?
You gotta click on this, and then you gotta click on this little T here. I think I gotta select everything, click on the little T, and then I can do the slider down
I
here.
remember having to Google for this.
Yeah, this is the most intuitive interface. Come on.
Yeah.
Why is it not
Type
working?
it in.
I'm going the wrong way, aren't I?
It's making you debug.
Everything is not selected now.
Didn't I just select everything?
Yeah.
Did it get bigger?
You got
And you might.
You got it.
And now it's not working. Okay. All right. So to integrate Awesomium, there's two classes really we have to focus on here. This Awesomium handler, which is going to show up in a minute, Yeah, this is C++ for you guys who haven't seen it in a while. There's a lot of underscores and not a lot of comments and really long horizontal lines, and it's not pretty. Really, this is all code I wrote, and I wasn't really thinking about other people looking at it. So you might see things in here that make you cringe a little bit. That's okay. All right, so here's Awesomium. And this init method will happen here. So at this point, I create this web at here. This web core is the thing that actually will, after this line executes, on my system, I will be able to see an Awesomium process running on my machine. This is the thing that kicks it off. Then after I have that, I provide it what is called a surface factory. So the surface factory is something that Awesomium is going to say, hey, give me something to draw on. I need a place to put my data. Do you provide that for me, right? This is one of the bigger pieces of interfacing with Awesomium. So my implementation of the Awesomium surface factory looks like this. It's in this class down here. So let's see, Awesomium factory, right? There's a couple of classes mixed in here. You implement this create surface method. Come on, highlight. And all I do is I have this Awesomium surface that I give back to it. And the Awesomium surface is the thing that actually does the work. Now, the big method here, and really the core of the integration with the surface stuff, is this paint method, right? And what this does is you'll see that they actually send you this unsigned, this buffer here, and this buffer is the screen buffer. So let's say you're running in a full screen mode, right? On a 1080p screen, you'll have about 2 million pixels, right, to show. So it'll give you 2 million times 8 bytes, 4 bytes each of data of this buffer. It says, hey, this is what the Chrome engine rendered for me. You can do whatever you want with this at this point. What I do is I maintain an internal buffer of that data, and I just copy their buffer into my buffer, right? They'll also give you, because that's pretty inefficient to give you the full screen every time, especially if something is not changing, they'll give you like clipping regions. So yeah, well, only this part of the buffer actually changed, so you can just update this part of your internal buffer, right? So it makes it a bit more efficient. It's a lot less data that actually have to transfer between Awesomium and yourself. And then what I do with that buffer is this is, by the way, okay, just a little background. This application is a little 3D rendering engine that I wrote that I wanted to put interface on top of, right? And I looked at a bunch of different things to say, like, what's a good tool to use for interface? There's things like Qt and GNU Kit, or I could just write my own. And I happened across a blog post where a guy talked about, like, I use Awesomium because HTML's natural thing is user interface, select boxes and drop downs, and, all these things are built in and right there for you in HTML. So if you can use HTML, you should do it. And so that's how I went down the path of integrating Awesomium, and that's why it's in C++. That's the first thing. It's not in like language we normally use, because 3D stuff, I mean, you can do it in other languages. I like to do it in C++, which is a little bit faster, and I like to just code C++ sometimes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When did we jump from a directory listing program to a 3D rendering program?
So the directory listing program is running inside of this program.
Okay.
This is the framework. I'm just giving you the background to what the source code is that you guys are looking at, because you need to be able to. I wrote this 3D rendering program, and I put that on top. The directory listing program is just the HTML. I'm going to render it within this to show you guys how it works. Does that make sense?
So you're tapping into Awesomium at a very low level, like pixel by pixel basis.
Yes, and that's what this bit of code right here is, where I'm actually taking that pixel by pixel thing. This is running in OpenGL, so I'm actually creating a OpenGL quad, a full screen quad, writing the pixel data to that quad, and then rendering that quad out to the screen. And
are there Like, do you always have to write this code? Like, or are there like plugins or
No, so
default settings and stuff?
no. Well, I mean, they don't. To render to the screen, you could do that anyway. You could actually just have, all like every language has like an image class that you can write the image to, and it'll do it either on it won't do hardware rendering necessarily, but it'll just be able to put an image on the screen. This just happens to be because I already had all this stuff, and this is I needed to be performant. I'm using low level graphics rendering to render it.
And for .NET, I think they have a browser control. You just drop in into your UI, and you could just start using it. So you don't need any background code.
Yep. And this is ultimately how this, So this bit of code it will take the Awesomium buffer, draw it to the screen, and that's that. And then for user interface stuff, right, which actually goes up a little bit here, is whenever I'm using this library called SDL to receive inputs. Whenever I receive a mouse event, I just inject that directly into the web view. Same thing with the left mouse button, right mouse button. That's what this stuff is doing. It's just saying, hey, my program received this. I'm just handing it off to Awesomium. Let Awesomium kind of do what it needs to do. Now I want to show you guys.
That seems like a lot of boilerplate. Do you need to write event mapping for everything that the user is doing?
Yeah, because Awesomium doesn't know what it only knows. The events it can handle, right? It doesn't know what left button mouse click is across every platform, right? It just knows hey, I'm gonna assign this enum, and I'm expecting that you're responsible for giving me it in the form that I understand. Does that make sense? Like in this case, where
So this is essentially where you would hook into your actual program.
Yes, this is inside your actual program. With the .NET version, I'm not sure it just does this for you.
Mm-hmm. With the .NET version, you pretty much have a browser open, full screen. So whatever you do gets translated to the browser.
And you just use normal DOM events that you can hook into.
Yeah, exactly. Everything is through the browser.
I remember I think came across this when we were doing video wall.
Yeah, because I had to
Yeah, because there was a restriction with using JavaScript from the .NET.
That's the .NET browser, right?
Yeah, we were debating on whether or not
that's
we
so
should.
Underpowered.
Yeah, whether or not we should do a native Windows app or do sort of your in-browser thing, and then this came across this, but they had a plugin where you could code against and sort of just write HTML and JavaScript and have it rendered for you.
Yeah. So I mean,
this is getting deep into the bowels.
Yeah, this is I mean, like I said, it's in C++, so you don't get anything for free. Everything you've got to do, and then you do end up with kind of crappy code that looks like this, but you can usually find it on the internet somewhere. So I can show you guys how this looks running so back to here. I'm gonna make it use the mock, right? So it's not gonna reference Awesomium yet. It's not gonna invoke JavaScript events on Awesomium yet. It's just gonna show what that demo that we just did. So, right? So this is just my app. It's running Awesomium. It looks exactly like the browser. There's nothing here. These are just using that. So it's not doing anything different than Chrome is doing. By the way, so up here when it's this is how you actually load a page into it, and this thing is slower. You just, as long as it's in your path, the executables path, it can understand what that URL is. It will go in there and just pick it up. So the file lister is there. Now I'm going to comment out this code and tell Awesomium to handle the JavaScript events. Right now, remember everything that this thing does is in that lister object, the thing that says takes a path and lists the files in a directory. And so what we can do is go back here. I have this JavaScript delegate that kind of handles all these JavaScript events for Awesomium, and it will see the first thing it does is actually creates a global JavaScript object. WebView create global JavaScript object lister, and it gives me a reference to that. So that's actually before it even loads, it'll say, okay, just create that object. What's nice and kind of weird is that you do this code before the page loads. So you actually like set up your JavaScript globals before there's any HTML there, which is kind of weird because you always think like load your HTML and then your JavaScript objects are created. But this, you set it up ahead of time, and then you register methods on that you expect. In this case, on line 18, you can see I just say, okay, you're going to get a list directory method, and that true at the end means it's going to return a value. It's going to return back a what's called a JS value in Awesomium world. So if we scroll down a bit, we can see this is the method on method call with return value, right? That's what's going to happen when JavaScript does lister.list directory. This method gets invoked because it's an object that Awesomium knows about. It's going to go into the list directory. It's going to give me it's going to give me the method name as list directory. And as you can see up here, list directory, starting at line 23, is my implementation of it. So the name doesn't matter. It's just whatever I called it. And this will actually do stuff on the file system. It'll actually go through in the file system, pick up all the files, and actually just handcraft some JSON right here. That's what it's doing. It's just handcrafting some JSON from the file name. So we can run it with this version of the file list there. And you see, I set it to it's not there yet. I set it to the root. Zoom in. I can't zoom in actually, because that's not a feature that I support on this app. But you can see it's actually in my file system, right? So I can go into like users, mark unit, go into my code directory, and it's actually Awesomium is actually doing the back work, but the JavaScript doesn't know any wiser, right? It's the same exact JavaScript that was running in that other bit. It still thinks that the lister object is a regular JavaScript object, and it's just calling it and doing all these kind of cool things. Now, Byron talked about like what's the point? What's his 3D rendering engine? So, and how it applies to this. Well, I can show you. So this is being rendered in my 3D rendering engine. What I can do is I can switch the view mode to this, which is actually this is really slow here, but you see like I'm actually like rendering I rendered a little scene with a little spaceship and then there's the Awesomium window is right there. It's just a quad that's in my scene that has some stuff. You can actually interact with this thing too. You can do like ray casting and pass the events into this 3D world and interact with Awesomium because it's just an image and it doesn't know,
Can you use transparency?
Yeah. So the transparency. So I can show you an example of how that would work. The transparency you set on the HTML. So let's get a idea going here. So the body background here color is white. We could just set this to transparent and then restart it. Yeah, see it. So this is it render in ortho mode, and there's nothing really interesting behind. Let's see if I can get like it's kind of going slow there, right? You can kind of see it from the top there. You can see like the grid is showing through the bottom of the Awesomium window.
That's a scene of the pilot's HUD as he's like he's trying to find something to read.
So this is how I use this Awesomium. I use it as a menu container around this scene. You can imagine that I make menuing, I make drop downs and all that stuff, and I overlay it on top of this scene, and so I have a full interactive 3D scene behind it. Now, everything I've been talking about relates kind of to this program and the use case that I've been discussing. But for us and the applicable use cases is that, we do write native desktop applications. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for Paymatic since I don't trust JavaScript with no money, but floating point calculations and things like that. There's no like decimal type, which is pretty useful. But if we needed to write, a simple, desktop app, that did something for some client, we don't have to necessarily go through the steps of writing it in Java and having to use Swing and it'd be ugly. Writing in .NET and necessarily locking us down to that platform. Leveraging the fact that
Not
we could,
anymore.
yeah, well, whatever with us,
Hopefully.
It's coming.
we could write really nice, rich UIs in HTML. We could do the same process where we just mock out the Awesomium part, just have the interface work, and then just hook in the native bits. An example would be, let's say we have to write an app that interface with a piece of hardware, right? It's, for instance, we had to do something for Paymatic where most of it was a web service, except for one bit where it uses a check scanner, right? So most of it we could have written in HTML and JavaScript, except for that one bit where we need to actually say, hey, scan this check. That's the one bit we would write in the native in native code, and then there'd be some Awesomium hardware JavaScript object that allowed us to say scan check, and that would then delegate down into the Awesomium layer. It would do it, and that code would more or less, the code that we wrote in HTML is cross-platform. That's why I like this, because I write the same code on my Windows machine. I run it on OS X. I run it on Linux. Not too successfully. There's some issues, but it's not like I have to rewrite the UI every time. It's not like I have to think about cross OS issues. It just works, which is, I think, kind of the same benefit that we see with hybrid apps. And I would say if we were ever, we should give it a serious consideration. I recommended it for Video Wall because what we were doing was, with the Connect, we were just doing one part of it. We were just doing hardware, right? Yeah. If we had done we could have done it really done everything else in HTML except for that one little hardware bit where we used native.NET, to interface with the Connect.
Are there
Question?
I was just gonna ask, are there things like Awesomium in the same space that are doing similar things?
Yeah, so I mean, you can just do straight Berkelium yourself, right? But that's like really kind of nerdy and super crazy.
Straight what?
There's this thing, huh?
I don't know what that is.
Berkelium is what this is, just another project that this is based off of. They just happen to give you nice wrappers for it. There's this project called Coherent UI, which is very games focused. That also does exactly the same thing. So most of the time, these applications are for real-time applications, or real-time application developers. But according to Awesomium, like Microsoft uses this, Autodesk uses this. I'm not sure if they use it for like Maya or 3D Studio Max, but yeah. There's a few people who've actually, because SpiderMonkey and Chromium they're all open source. People have they've rolled their own implementations of sort of these kind of browser processes that run on the background. Awesomium just kind of went and packaged it up nicely.
You said that you having issues when you're moving from one platform like to Linux, for example. If you would do it in Qt, would Awesomium integrate with it?
Awesomium doesn't care, right? Like,
well, I mean,
you could mix this UI all you want. It's just code. Like, like I said, all Awesomium is providing me is this image. It's just giving me this image of the thing. So I could potentially have Qt
as a base, and it would actually.
I don't know. Yeah, well, you wouldn't be able to interface those two things. You'd have to do that in your code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
But you could definitely. There's nothing that prohibits you from adding more UI frameworks on top of this. This is just a thing that makes that. It's really just rendering. That's its primary thing. Is like it renders HTML for you.
There's also app.js where you can use Node.
Oh, I haven't looked at that.
So I saw an app with a source code and it was just programming Node. It's pretty nice.
So it's using Node, but it renders.
Yeah, it's like HTML. It renders like you have the HTML, and I didn't go too much in details, but the app was working well.
Ah,
It was actually to watch video. It was like a torrent app, popcorn time. I recommend, by the way.
Popcorn.
Popcorn time, yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was just Node.js. And they were just handling torrents like that. I didn't go too much in the code, to be honest.
But it's in GitHub, right?
Huh?
It's on GitHub. The
Oh, yeah,
code.
yeah, it's on GitHub, yeah. You can see the whole code.
Any other questions?
And here you're hosting HTML locally, but there's nothing to stop you from hosting the HTML on a CDN somewhere and
Yeah, for sure.
updating it in the background.
For
so
sure.
Your app is always
Yeah, there's
updated.
this whole resource mechanism, that I didn't go over, but there's a way because it needs to know how to figure out. You need to tell it how to access resources, and you could totally do everything on the network. You'd be handling you'd be handling those URLs.
Mhm.
So what happens is Awesomium will say, hey, I've got a request for this thing, right? What do I do with it? And then your application gets it like, okay, well, I've got to go to the web and get that thing for you, and then I'll send it back to you. So you bridge the Awesomium into the world interaction.
I think with the control, it could even do that for you. So you could set up your web control to go to google.com and you have Google running in a browser inside your app.
Yeah.
And then you could intercept the messages in the middle.
If you install the Awesomium installer, it comes with these cool little demos, and one of them is like a bunch of browser windows that you can like do 3D transformations on. It's actually pretty cool if you want to check it out and see what it's like.
It's hard to tell on the TV, but like, how is the performance in your experience?
So that's the thing, right? It's running so my application is pegged, I think, at 60 frames per second. What I do is every frame, I ask Awesomium for an update, but I'm not guaranteed to get anything new, but it doesn't hinder the performance. I'm not sure of what its internal frame rate is, but it doesn't affect the performance of mine, and it doesn't ever seem unresponsive. So even if it drops down to a free frames a second, it's not like it's too bad unless it's doing a lot of stuff, So I couldn't answer that. I don't have an answer for that, but I can say it doesn't really matter. Is essentially because it doesn't affect this performance.
What is the rendering engine that it's using in this case? You might have mentioned that earlier on, but maybe I missed it.
Is this whatever they are like on Chrome? What version of Chrome are we on? They're like maybe 5 versions of Chrome behind or something like that. So they're on there's this older fork of Chrome that's powering this thing. So whatever that is, like SpiderMonkey or what it is, not V8 or JavaScript. What is the rendering engine for?
I don't know the name of the rendering engine, but it's just the HTML rendering engine that's from Chromium, right?
Yeah. Same thing with the.
Do they keep updating that? Like
they're kind of slow to. That's what I'm saying. Like they don't have 64-bit support and stuff like that because I think like Chrome might have gone to like 64 only or something, and that's what's kind of holding them back. But yeah, there are a few versions behind, but modern enough, within the last year, so you might not get the latest and greatest ES6 kind of support that they got going on, but if you're doing that kind of stuff, it's
right. But before whatever major changes happened to Chromium, were they updating the version of Chromium that they were forking off of like frequently, or do they do that very infrequently? Is what I'm wondering.
I can't tell. I can't really say because I only started using this last year, and they're not so frequent with the updates recently. So I would say maybe they were better before. In the last year, I installed it at like at version 7.4, and now we're on 7.5, and that's about 8 months later. 1.7.4, 1.7.5. So they're very slow. But they say they've got lots of things in the pipe.
How does it handle things like scrolling in your HTML?
Scrolling is funny because there's a scroll for your delegate. I just never implemented it because I didn't. There's a scroll on your surface. Oh, that's fucking let's see down here, and you'll just see big. Where is that scroll? Here, see, this is my scroll implementation right here. So it'll tell you if there's a. It's a big flat blank empty nothing. Because I know I'm gonna be only in full screen mode, so I didn't really like need to implement scrolling. But it does, yeah. You can, yeah, those are the same thing. Like, yeah, it's just easy math. I just was unmotivated to figure out how to do it. The other thing is, it's like since this is kind of low level and on the fringe, you're not gonna get a lot of Stack Overflow help on these these problems. You know, this is
You're on your own.
you're on your own. You might end up in some mailing list or like this is what is to be expected of the support
Graphics
of
programming help, though. I mean, that's essentially what you're doing.
That's true.
yeah. But
In the screen buffer that you're grabbing from, that also Awesomium is providing to you, if you have something that's larger than your screen size, is it just giving you everything, and then you have to do the math for that sort of, if you wanted it to, be a larger screen that you then scroll down?
I think
Or
yeah,
do you send it kind of like your screen size?
it's the same thing. If you like if you render that in HTML, right? It's not gonna if you've got a full screen Chrome window and you've got a thing that goes way down, it's either gonna scroll bar it or it's just gonna clip it, right? So you're just gonna get whatever is visible,
Mhm.
and then it's gonna say when somebody scrolls, it's gonna give you the scrolling data, you know?
Okay.
You
So
understand?
are you getting that information though?
You're not getting this. You're not getting the because it's not rendering that stuff, right?
Okay.
It's only ever giving you what it's rendering, and there would be a waste for it to just be rendering off-screen pixels anyway.
Right.
So how would you know when to scroll then?
How do you know when to scroll?
Yeah, like
Like-
if you would render something, you know,
Yeah.
like your, I see here is like a clip rectangle, right? It's
Yeah.
like for example 10 by 10, right? And you have a page which is 10 by 50, but you're getting 10 by 10 all the time. How do you know how to scroll?
You're not. So you're not getting you're not asking for a 10 by 10. It's just telling you this is the region that's been updated of my buffer. Does that make sense?
But if you wanted to like conditionally display a scroll bar based on the,
I think it handles the scroll bar rendering.
oh, it does.
Yeah, right. Because that's part of Chrome, right? It's gonna handle all it's doing is saying, hey, we're gonna scroll. This is what you need to display. You either need to scroll your application or just paint this over, and figure out how that's gonna happen.
Oh, that makes sense.
I see.
So you can imagine just like everything without the address bar below
Yes.
is really what it's giving you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Maybe I missed that, but does that come with a JavaScript engine?
Yeah. So a V8.
You can put JavaScript in the code of the page?
Yeah, that's what I'm running. That.
No,
So-
you don't have JavaScript for you.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. Although.
So
I
what-
know what you mean, okay.
Sorry.
What types are supported by, what was it, the WS lit method I saw there, whatever you were writing to the JavaScript engine with, like
Yeah.
when you were declaring objects, can you like, when you have like a method that is then returning, in your case, it was just a string of JSON.
Yeah.
Can you return like a JavaScript function?
Oh, I don't know. Actually, that's a good question. I mean, it makes sense that you would be able to, but I don't know how you modify that JS value to do that. But that's a good question. I should find out. Like most of the times, like what I cared about was interacting with strings.
Mhm.
Maybe you could pass references to other objects, but I'm not sure, and stuff like that. I'm trying to think. Like you would have to. Like a JavaScript function is not just string, right? You actually have you would have to create that JavaScript function in Awesomium, or
Yeah,
have a
either that or
reference, or
have
have
it
a
already
have a
created.
reference to it, and then I don't know how you would pass that reference. They use
Like, do you have that kind of access to the JavaScript engine where like you can check to see if something's defined and then use it that way?
I think you can do some introspection on the objects to see what's there, looking up using their internal ID system, but that's a little bit more serious than I looked into it. Won't lie. As my JavaScript skills are limited to jQuery and making alternating ULs with and child selectors. Yeah, I don't know if I mean, there would probably be some work to do kind of that stuff, but maybe not.
The other thing that made me think of that question is the fact that you can define like global objects in your
Yeah.
example, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, it's cool because like if for nothing else, you get to like sort of like decompose the browser as a program, which is kind of cool. Then think about what it is that a browser is and stuff like that, and how it works. And really, it's not such a like a mystery box. Really, it's just a program that does the rendering, and the way you interface with it makes you think, yeah. At the end of the day, it's just rendering an image, and you can do whatever you want with that, and that's kind of cool. And I like that kind of aspect of it. I thought it was interesting. And like I said, there are some applications. It's just something like I hope you guys at least just kind of like have in the back of your mind, like, oh, maybe it's something I could use for if the use case ever comes up. Or you could make a 3D engine or something. Whatever you want to do.
I'll tell you this much: it's a huge step forward from browser controls in C, C++, etc., where you have to import them and
Yeah,
so
I mean,
limited.
nothing is easy in C++. Like nothing at all.
Okay.
UI is a pain and everything. And I was just trying to make my life just a little bit easier. And at the same time, like get to practice some JavaScript, and some CSS, because I don't really like that's not my job, so I don't really get to do it. Here, I get to figure out, how to make some alternating row colors. Like that was a big victory for me, guys. Like I won't lie.
Can you spin up multiple Awesomium processes if you wanted to have like say like in the in your 3D render
Yeah, I think so.
thing, if you had
Yeah,
like an
every one of
overlay
those is
view
just
and then,
just a web core, so I think you can.
okay.
I don't know if that's actually a separate JavaScript Awesomium process, or it like uses like a tabbing mechanism or something like that built into the browser that's gonna allow you to render multiple screens. But then you gotta figure out like who gets the inputs and stuff like that. I think it might be a separate process, but it's like something that's easy to play with, and I can tell you soon. Yeah. Anything else?
The text was selectable, right? You can
Yeah, I believe. Let's see. Do we have it still running? Nope, we don't have it running.
Why did the clicks? I don't know.
Let's see. Oh no, wait. Let me switch over to. Wait. Oh, it's transparent. That's why I'm seeing everything down here now. I forgot we did that little change there. So let's see. Yeah.
Okay.
And my little spaceship and grid. Give you guys a lunch and learn on that OpenGL if you want, so you can figure out all this insanity that's happening over this where is it, that part of the code where it does the
Linear algebra.
it's linear algebra. It's let's see right here. This is this bit of code right here where it's just like all these like GL commands. Just this pretty much just means
GL move, GL.
This is just update the image OpenGL image with this new data. It's like 7 lines of code to do that with all these like enumerations and stuff like that. It's pretty This is like how to stretch it. That's all these flags are.
Mind-numbing stuff, man.
Oh come on!
It's not that bad. Honestly,
system calls.
I like to read my code as I type it. Like
this is
my list.
OpenGL. This is kind of unrelated. OpenGL is a giant state machine, right? It maintains its state, and so you're constantly having to like flip states on and off, and it never forgets. So you might in some totally different area turned on that you're gonna do, texture mapping a certain way, and then you do it. And you're in this block of code and you do something, you're like, why does it look like that? Why is it doing that? You got to remember, like, oh yeah, back there. Because it's just like, it doesn't know. It doesn't care. But OpenGL has gotten a lot better. I started programming OpenGL when it was still fixed function, which is, it's a lot of like there's a program running on your video card, and you're making individual like method calls essentially on that program. Pretty much, you're saying, do this transform, do this rotate. You're saying GL rotate, GL transform, GL all this stuff, and you're using this crazy stack that they have. So you push and pop operations on. It was insane. Luckily, they've gotten a lot better with just sort of being a programmable interface and more user friendly.
Played with GL for
OpenGL
Java,
right now is
of course, that's like
outperforming DirectX, according to some.
heavyweight.
Depends.
Oh, yeah.
Depends. There's always that war
You
between
can
the
do
two of
all
them.
you can do
DirectX is always a couple of years ahead of OpenGL in terms of feature set. I feel like, you know, they're doing tessellation way before OpenGL did tessellation, just because Microsoft controls the specification and actually like bosses around the NVIDIA and AMD and tells them to like implement things a certain way. You know.
They have like the luxury of being decisive.
Yeah.
Like,
Whereas OpenGL and the Chronos group, they drag ass and they'll be like, oh, and then people like kind of implement stuff and it gets treated as like a redheaded stepchild sometimes, But it's become nowadays, since everybody in this room at least, and everybody in New York City walks around with an OpenGL device in their pocket, it's become a lot bigger deal, because every phone runs OpenGL, except Windows Phone.
That's true.
Which nobody cares about.
Yeah, we gotta do another OpenGL session. That would be cool.
OpenGL would be.
That might be a lunch you'll learn because we need lunch for that one.
You might need lunch. You might need some Tylenol. You might.
GL for Java is a little bit more easy to swallow.
Yeah.
Because you get the.
We can't hear you. No. You have questions, Alex?
That was from the phone.
Oh, sorry.
All right. Any final questions?
He's like, leave me alone. I'm reading.
There's some